Hello again, friends. I hope your coffee is warm and your heart feels steady today, no matter how loud or uncertain the world outside your window may be. Have you ever trusted silence so much that you mistook it for safety? Have you ever believed that if nothing looked wrong, then nothing could be wrong, only to learn that the most dangerous things move quietly, unnoticed, until it's almost too late? In the late autumn of a forgotten year, a broken army medic named Caleb Turner drove into a small mountain town called Redwood Hollow, carrying nothing but his past and a silver-coated German shepherd who never stopped listening. He didn't come to save anyone. He came to disappear. But when people began collapsing from what looked like an ordinary flu, when doors closed, voices lowered, and fear crept through the town faster than the sickness itself, it wasn't the doctors or the officials who saw the truth first. It was the dog. While others laughed, hesitated, and denied, Rex stood still, refusing doors, refusing people, refusing the lie that everything was fine. And when the quiet town finally realized it was holding its breath, one wounded man would be forced to choose between staying hidden or stepping back into a world that still needed him. This is a story about invisible danger, the loyalty of a dog who never stopped guarding life, and the courage it takes to listen when the warning comes softly. Late autumn settled over Redwood Hollow like a held breath. The sky was a pale, washed-out gray, the kind that never quite decided whether it would snow or rain. Pine-covered hills encircled the small town, their upper slopes already dusted with white, while the valley floor remained damp and brown. A cold wind drifted down from the mountains, carrying the sharp scent of wet cedar and old leaves. It was the kind of weather that made people close their doors early and speak in quieter voices, as if sound itself might shatter in the chill. Redwood Hollow was not a place people came to be found. It was a place they came to disappear. Caleb Turner arrived just before noon in a weather-beaten dark green pickup truck that looked older than most of the buildings lining Main Street. He was 46 years old, tall but slightly stooped, as if his shoulders had learned to brace for weight that no longer existed. His build was lean, not weak, cords of muscle still visible beneath his heavy canvas jacket. But there was a tension in the way he moved, a constant readiness that never fully shut off. His hair, once dark brown, had begun to gray at the temples, cut short in the practical style of someone who disliked mirrors. His face was narrow, weathered, with a faint scar along his left jawline, a souvenir from a night he did not talk about. Caleb's eyes were the most striking thing about him. They were steady, observant, and tired in a way that sleep could not fix. He parked near the edge of town without turning off the engine at first, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel. He watched the slow movement of Redwood Hollow through the windshield, a woman unlocking the door of a bakery, a delivery truck idling beside the post office, a pair of teenagers laughing too loudly as they crossed the street. It all looked normal, too normal. Only when the truck engine ticked and cooled did he finally step out. The first to emerge from the vehicle was Rex. The German shepherd jumped down with controlled grace, landing softly on all fours. He was large even for his breed, about 7 years old, his frame powerful and compact, his coat a mix of sable gray and black that shimmered faintly in the weak daylight. His ears stood erect, swiveling slightly as he assessed the unfamiliar environment. His amber eyes were alert, intelligent, and deeply focused, scanning the town with the seriousness of a professional who had learned that danger often wore ordinary faces. Rex wore no vest, no visible insignia, but the discipline was unmistakable. This was not a pet. This was a working dog who had simply never stopped working. He circled Caleb once, then sat at his left side, close enough that their shadows touched. Caleb reached down without looking and rested his hand briefly on the dog's neck. "Easy," he murmured, more habit than instruction. Rex did not relax, but he stayed. They didn't attract much attention at first. Redwood Hollow was used to strangers passing through on their way to somewhere else. But when Caleb walked into Miller's general store, the low murmur of conversation dipped just enough to notice. Behind the counter stood Frank Miller, a man in his late 50s with a broad belly and a permanently flushed face. Frank had been born in Redwood Hollow and had never seriously considered leaving. He had the friendly, practical demeanor of someone who knew everyone's business and pretended not to. "Afternoon," Frank said, his eyes flicking briefly to Rex before returning to Caleb. "Passing through?" "No," Caleb replied. His voice was calm, even, but rarely used. "Just moved in," Frank raised his eyebrows. "That's so. Don't get many of those this time of year." Caleb set a folded paper on the counter, the deed to a small, neglected property near the old ranger station on the north edge of town. "Bought the place up by Pine Ridge," he said. Frank winced slightly. "That old cabin? Been empty a long time." "I don't mind." Rex's ears twitched as a man near the coffee station coughed, once sharp and wet. The dog's head turned immediately. His nostrils flared almost imperceptibly. Caleb noticed. He always did. The man coughing was Evan Brooks, a mechanic in his early 30s. Stocky build, grease permanently embedded in the lines of his hands, hair cut too short by someone who didn't care. Evan waved off concerned looks with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Dry air," he said. "Gets me every year." Rex did not look convinced. Caleb felt a familiar tightening in his chest. Not fear, exactly, but recognition. The subtle kind that came before numbers on charts and alarms on screens. He pushed the thought away. Not here. Not again. Caleb paid for his supplies, basic groceries, bottled water, disinfectant wipes, things most people didn't prioritize, and turned to leave. That was when Emily Carter walked in. She was in her early 30s, medium height, with a slim but sturdy build that spoke of long shifts and too little rest. Her brown hair was pulled back into a low ponytail, strands already slipping free. She wore scrubs beneath a heavy jacket, and her face carried the quiet fatigue of someone who spent her days watching people hurt and trying not to carry them home. Emily worked as one of only 2 full-time nurses at Redwood Hollow's small clinic. She paused when she saw Rex, not in fear, but in curiosity. "That's a beautiful dog," she said, offering a cautious smile. "Working breed?" "Yes," Caleb replied. "What kind of work?" Caleb hesitated a fraction of a second too long. "Search and rescue," he said. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. Rex shifted slightly closer to Caleb, his gaze flicking from Emily to Evan Brooks, who was coughing again, harder this time. Emily noticed Rex's attention. Her expression sharpened, professional instincts stirring. "Is he trained to detect something?" she asked. "Many things," Caleb said, quietly. Their eyes met. For a moment, there was an understanding neither of them could fully articulate yet. That evening, the sky darkened early. A fine mist crept through the trees as Caleb unloaded supplies at the cabin. The structure was old, sagging slightly on one side, with weather-warped wood and a roof that had seen better decades. It stood alone at the edge of the forest, half hidden by tall pines, far enough from town that the sounds of life faded quickly. Perfect. Inside, the air smelled of dust and cold timber. Caleb opened windows, letting the damp wind sweep through. Rex moved methodically from room to room, sniffing corners, door frames, vents, cataloging the space as only he could. The dog paused at one wall near the back of the cabin. His body stiffened. A low sound vibrated in his chest. Caleb crossed the room immediately. "What is it, boy?" Rex pressed his nose against the wood, then turned his head toward the distant town. Caleb closed his eyes. He had come to Redwood Hollow for silence, for distance, for an end to the constant vigilance that had kept him alive and hollow at the same time. But as night settled over the valley and a distant siren wailed once, then cut off abruptly, Caleb knew something else had followed him here. Not war, not ghosts, something quieter, something spreading. He knelt beside Rex and rested his forehead briefly against the dog's. "We'll watch," he whispered. "That's all, just watch." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint, unsettling sense that Redwood Hollow was about to change. The morning came in gray layers, fog clinging low to the valley like damp gauze. From the porch of the cabin, Redwood Hollow looked softened and indistinct, its outlines blurred by mist and distance. Caleb Turner stood still, hands wrapped around a chipped enamel mug, watching Rex move along the tree line. The dog worked without command, nose low, gait measured, tail steady, mapping scents the way other beings mapped streets. A crow cried somewhere upslope, sharp and insistent, then went quiet. Rex stopped. His head lifted. The muscles along his shoulders tightened. Caleb set the mug down. They drove into town an hour later, the truck's tires hissing on wet pavement. The radio crackled with static and half-finished sentences. Weather advisories, nothing urgent. Main Street looked unchanged from the day before, but the feeling was not. It sat in Caleb's chest like a low-pressure system, subtle but wrong. At the clinic, a narrow, single-story building painted an optimistic blue, Emily Carter moved briskly between rooms. Up close, the fatigue on her face was clearer than yesterday. Dark crescents under her eyes, the set of her jaw harder. She was kind by habit and precise by necessity, the kind of nurse who remembered names and watched hands. When she saw Caleb through the glass, she hesitated, then opened the door. "You should come in," she said, "if you're not busy." "I am," Caleb replied, "but it can wait." Emily led him down the short hallway to an exam room. On the bed lay Evan Brooks, the mechanic from Miller's, his skin flushed and damp, chest rising too fast. He was strong-looking even now, thick arms, broad shoulders, but his eyes were unfocused, pupils too wide. He coughed, a wet sound that rattled, then swallowed as if the effort had cost him. "High fever," Emily said quietly. 104, oxygen saturation keeps dipping. He came in overnight. Caleb didn't step closer. He watched the pattern of Evan's breathing, the way his fingers twitched against the sheet. Rex sat at the doorway, rigid, nose working. The dog's ears flattened a fraction, and he leaned away from the bed. "When did it start?" Caleb asked. "Yesterday afternoon," Emily said. "Headache, then chills, then this." Caleb nodded once. "Any others?" Emily hesitated. "A few. Flu season, we thought. But this—" She stopped, then finished. "This feels fast." In the waiting area, Sarah Whitmore sat with her daughter, a woman in her late 30s with a tall, spare frame and careful movements, as if she rationed energy. Her hair, once blonde, had dulled to the color of straw. Her face bore the tight composure of someone who had learned not to ask for help. A logging accident had taken her husband 2 winters ago, and since then she had learned to carry things alone. Her daughter, Lily, 7, swung her legs, and hummed under her breath, healthy and bored and oblivious. Rex paused when he passed them, then sat, alert but calm. Caleb noted it, no reaction, not yet. Outside, at Miller's, a hand-lettered sign went up in the window, closed for cleaning. Frank Miller wiped the counter with exaggerated vigor, his geniality strained thin. "Just a bug," he told anyone who lingered. "Happens every year." By noon, the fog lifted, revealing blue that felt counterfeit. Caleb drove north to the old ranger station, a squat concrete building with rusted vents and a chain-link fence sagging at the corners. He parked and walked the perimeter with Rex. The dog's pace slowed near the intake grates. He whined, low and brief, then pawed once at the ground. Caleb crouched. The metal smelled cold and old, and under it, something faintly sweet, chemical, wrong. He photographed the vents, the peeling signage, the ductwork that disappeared underground toward the abandoned mill farther downslope. He didn't go in, not yet. That afternoon, Mark Holloway called an informal meeting at the town hall. Mark was in his early 50s, trim, with an earnest smile he used like a tool. He had been a realtor before becoming mayor, comfortable with optimism and allergic to panic. He stood beneath a faded flag and spoke of caution, of patience, of not overreacting. "We don't have confirmation," he said. "Let the clinic do its work." Caleb stood at the back with Rex at heel. He raised his hand. "Early isolation would help," he said. "Ventilation checks, temporary closures." Mark smiled without warmth. "Appreciate the concern, Mr. Turner, but we don't need outsiders stirring fear." "I'm not an outsider," Caleb replied evenly. "I live here." Rex shifted. Across the room, a woman coughed. Short, sharp. Rex's head snapped around. The room watched the dog before they watched Caleb. Emily caught Caleb's eye from the side wall. She said nothing. By evening, Evan Brooks was intubated and airlifted out. The helicopter's thrum rolled over the valley, scattering birds. People gathered on sidewalks, hands in pockets, eyes lifted. The sound faded. The town exhaled, but not in relief. Night fell colder than expected. Caleb sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad, sketching the town from memory. Streets, buildings, airflow. He wrote times, names, symptoms. Rex lay near the back wall, restless, rising to pace, then settling again. A knock came after dark. Tom Alvarez, the volunteer EMT, stood on the porch, shoulders hunched against the cold. He was in his late 20s, compact and earnest, with a shaved head and a habit of apologizing too quickly. "Clinic's full," he said. "Emily asked me to see if Rex might help." Caleb pulled on his jacket. They worked until midnight. Not miracles, just watching, noting, separating where possible. Rex never barked. He pointed with his body, his refusals precise. Two people he flagged early worsened quickly. One he ignored entirely, sleeping off a simple cold. Patterns emerged like ghosts. Near the mill, Rex refused to go closer than the fence. His hackles rose. Caleb marked it in red. Before dawn, Caleb stood outside the cabin again. The air tasted metallic. In town, lights burned where they shouldn't have. He closed his eyes and remembered a field hospital, tense breathing in the heat, the smell of disinfectant failing against something smarter. He had come here for silence. Instead, Redwood Hollow had begun to cough. Morning broke brittle and bright, the kind of cold clarity that made everything look clean while hiding rot beneath. Redwood Hollow woke to sirens this time. Not continuous, just brief pulses that cut the air and stopped, Caleb Turner stood at the edge of his driveway, watching the town come alive in pieces. Cars idled longer than usual. Doors opened and closed without conversation. The sense of something moving faster than the town's habits settled like frost. Rex worked the perimeter of the cabin first, then angled downhill toward the road. His posture was purposeful, head low, nose tracing an invisible map. Caleb followed, keeping distance, letting the dog choose the pace. At the bend near the old ranger station, Rex paused again, same spot as yesterday, but today the reaction sharpened. A short bark escaped him, controlled but unmistakable. Caleb marked the time. By mid-morning, the clinic's parking lot was full. Inside, Emily Carter moved with efficient calm, her voice steady even as the number of beds ran out. She had tied her hair back tighter than usual. The strain showed in the lines around her mouth. When she saw Caleb and Rex through the glass, she nodded once, permission without ceremony. They began in the hallway, not the rooms. Rex indicated people before they spoke, before fevers spiked. Emily followed Caleb's quiet instructions. Separate chairs, open a window here, close a door there. It wasn't isolation the way textbooks taught it, no tape, no guards, but it was separation by scent, by risk. People watched the dog with a mix of hope and suspicion. One man refused to move. Graham Phelps, early 60s, broad-shouldered with a red face and a booming voice that had once filled Union halls, stood his ground. He'd lost a brother to a factory closure years ago and never trusted authority since. "You're not telling me a dog decides where I sit," he said. Rex didn't approach him. The dog turned away. Emily caught the signal and gently redirected someone else instead. Graham scoffed, satisfied, not knowing that today, at least, he wasn't the problem. Outside, the mayor called another meeting, shorter this time. Mark Holloway looked thinner, his optimism fraying. He spoke of temporary measures, of keeping commerce open with caution. Caleb listened, then spoke plainly. Ventilation mattered more than closures. Movement patterns mattered more than curfews. "You can't wall this off," he said. "You have to interrupt it." A murmur rose. Lena Ortiz, owner of the daycare, stood near the back. She was small, compact, with tired eyes and hands rough from constant washing. A fire years ago had taken her first daycare and hardened her into vigilance. "If you don't close the mill access road," she said, "kids will keep walking past it. I won't risk that." Mark promised to review options. It was the language of delay. That afternoon, Caleb returned to the mill fence with Rex and Emily. The building loomed, timber darkened by decades of rain, vents coughing faint warmth into the cold air. Rex refused the gate again, body angled away, a low growl vibrating once before he quieted himself. Emily watched, jaw tight. "Airflow," Caleb said. "Something cycling." They didn't enter. They documented. Photos, wind direction, times. Caleb called Tom Alvarez to bring barrier tape, not to seal, just to warn. Tom arrived breathless, earnest as ever, and helped string it up. People slowed as they passed. Some crossed the street. By evening, the town felt smaller. Sarah Whitmore came to the cabin with Lily, bundled against the cold. Sarah stood straight despite exhaustion, her voice polite but guarded. "Rex sat by Lily at the clinic," she said. "He wouldn't leave her. Is that good?" Caleb crouched to Lily's level. "He thought she was fine," he said. Lily smiled, reassured. Sarah exhaled, the tension easing a notch she hadn't known she held. After they left, Caleb updated his map. He drew soft boundaries, no walls, just flows. Rex slept lightly, waking at every sound. Night brought another helicopter, another transfer, another name added. Redwood Hollow did not close. It thinned. The temperature dropped overnight, not enough to snow, but enough to sharpen everything. Redwood Hollow woke under a brittle blue sky, sunlight glinting off damp roofs as if nothing were wrong. Caleb Turner knew better. He stood in the kitchen doorway watching Rex pace, the dog's movements clipped and purposeful, a coiled tension riding under his fur. The legal pad on the table was filled now, times, names, arrows showing air movement. The map had begun to argue back. They went to the mill at first light, not to trespass, but to listen. The building sat like a tired animal, long and low, timber swollen and cracked, vents exhaling faint warmth into cold air. Rex slowed 50 feet from the fence and angled away, tail rigid. He refused the gate entirely. Caleb felt the confirmation settle, heavy and clean. A truck pulled up behind them. Nora Kim, the county environmental health inspector, stepped out. She was in her early 40s, short, compact, haircut blunt at the jaw, eyes sharp behind rectangular glasses. Practical to the bone, Nora had learned caution after a chemical spill early in her career had been minimized until it wasn't. She didn't waste words. "I got your photos," she said, "and your notes. Show me." Caleb walked her through the airflow, how cold mornings pulled air downhill, how the mill's old ventilation drew from shaded intakes and pushed toward Main Street by afternoon. Nora listened, nodding, eyes tracking Rex's refusal like data. "If there's a bio-aerosol cycling," she said, "this fits." They didn't open the gate. They flagged it. Nora placed official notices, bright and ugly against gray wood. It wasn't a shutdown, not yet, but it changed the way people walked. By midday, the clinic overflowed. Emily Carter worked without pause, her calm thinning to wire. She sent a message, short, precise, asking Caleb to come. Inside, the waiting area had become a geometry problem. Chairs spaced, windows cracked, people breathing carefully. Rex moved the line. He stopped twice, then sat, refusing to pass a man with clammy skin and a flat affect. The man was Jonah Reed, a substitute teacher in his late 20s, lanky with a gentle voice and a habit of apologizing. He protested softly, embarrassed. Emily took him aside anyway. 2 hours later, Jonah spiked a fever and dropped his oxygen. The room went quiet in a way that felt like belief. Across town, Miller's closed completely. Frank taped the sign with shaking hands. At the daycare, Lena Ortiz locked the gate and sent parents home in waves, her vigilance paying off as no children fell ill that day. Sarah Whitmore kept Lily inside, curtains open, watching the road like a sentry. When Rex passed their porch on patrol, Lily waved. The dog paused, tail easing once. Sarah's shoulders lowered a fraction. In the afternoon, Mark Holloway finally called it. A limited closure around the mill, a request rather than an order. He looked worn now, the realtor's, smile gone. Caleb didn't gloat. He stood with Nora and Emily and drew lines on a whiteboard, times when the wind turned, when symptoms followed. The dog lay at his feet, eyes open, working even at rest. It was during the third review that Rex rose and moved to the door, then stopped short, head snapping toward the street. A delivery van idled outside the clinic, exhaust drifting. Rex whined, low and urgent. Caleb followed his gaze to the van's open rear. Boxes stacked high, air moving through. "Close it," Caleb said. The driver, Miles Carter, Emily's younger brother, early 20s, wiry and stubborn, hesitated, then slammed the doors. Miles had grown up in Redwood Hollow and hated being told what to do, especially by strangers. He bristled. "I've got stops," he said. "You can wait," Emily said, steel entering her voice. "Or you can breathe outside." Rex settled. The moment passed. Another data point. By dusk, Nora confirmed elevated counts in air samples taken near the mill's intakes. Nothing definitive yet, but enough to justify escalation. The state was notified. It wouldn't be fast. It never was. Caleb drove home under a sky gone the color of old pewter. The cabin felt smaller tonight. Rex refused dinner, pacing instead, ears flicking at distant sounds. When the phone rang, Caleb answered on the first ring. Tom Alvarez's voice was tight. "It's Graham Phelps," he said. "Collapsed. He was fine yesterday." Caleb closed his eyes. He'd seen this before, the false confidence, the late turn. They went. Graham lay on a gurney in the high school gym, repurposed again and again by small towns. His red face had gone gray. The booming voice was gone. Rex approached, then stopped short, sat hard, and looked away. Emily met Caleb's eyes. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Later, alone, Caleb washed his hands until the skin burned. He remembered a field tent and a young soldier who'd laughed through a cough until he didn't. He pressed his palms to the sink and breathed. Night brought wind. The mill's vents hummed faintly, a tired machine still doing what it had been built to do. Nora's notices flapped. Rex lay with his head on Caleb's boot, finally still. By midnight the call came. The state would send a team. Dawn, maybe. Caleb wrote it down, then closed the notebook. Outside, Redwood Hollow slept uneasily. Thinner now, changed. The dog had been right. The town had listened. Late, but not too late. Snow threatened without arriving. A dry cold settling over Redwood Hollow that made every sound travel farther than it should. The mill's notices still flapped, but the road around it was quiet now, cones nudged into place by hands that had finally accepted caution. Caleb Turner woke before dawn to the steady tick of the heater and the softer, more important rhythm of Rex breathing at his feet. The dog's eyes were open. He had been awake for some time. The state team was late. Phones buzzed across town with fragments, delays at the pass, a crash on the interstate, weather moving in from the west. In the absence of authority, Redwood Hollow did what small towns always did when the choices ran out. It improvised. Emily Carter coordinated from the clinic with a calm that bordered on ferocity. She turned the gym into a triage ward again, posted handwritten schedules, and rationed staff like a quartermaster who had learned the cost of optimism. Her brother Miles drove supply runs under her direction now, chastened and careful, the stubbornness redirected into speed. Caleb set up a temporary screening route outside the clinic, using rope, cones, and borrowed heaters. People moved through in singles, coats zipped, voices low. Rex worked the line. He flagged, passed, flagged again. The pattern tightened. Fewer surprises. The dog was thinner now, along the flanks. Ribs hinted beneath the sable coat. But his focus did not waver. Near the edge of the route, Mrs. Eleanor Finch arrived with her cat bundled inside her coat. Eleanor was 78, bird-boned and precise, a retired librarian whose quiet manner hid a spine of iron shaped by decades of caring for others first. The cat, Milo, was a gray tabby of indeterminate age with one torn ear and a regal tolerance for indignity. Rex glanced once, then ignored them both. Eleanor smiled at that, a small victory. "Good," she said. "He knows." By mid-morning, the state truck finally appeared, white, anonymous, trailing road grime. Dr. Alan Price stepped out first, tall and narrow, hair already thinning, eyes sharp with a practiced skepticism. He shook hands, nodded at Nora Kim, took in the setup with a raised brow. "You've been busy," he said. "Effective," Emily replied. They didn't argue. Data spoke. Air samples, timelines, Rex's indications correlated with onset windows. Price watched the dog work, asked precise questions, then fewer questions. He authorized a broader cordon around the mill and ordered portable filtration units for the gym and clinic. It wasn't a cure, but it was leverage. The town thinned further. Church bells didn't ring. The cafe stayed dark. Sarah Whitmore volunteered at the screening route, tall and spare in borrowed gloves, her reserve turning into competence when given a task. Loss had taught her how to stand still in the middle of fear. Lily stayed home, waving from the window when Rex passed. The dog paused every time. That afternoon, Graham Phelps died. The news moved without sound, like a pressure change. People absorbed it privately, then adjusted their behavior. No speeches followed, no blame, just quieter footsteps and longer pauses before doors opened. At dusk, the wind shifted again. Rex stiffened and moved to the perimeter heaters, nose high, then stopped. Caleb followed his gaze to the filtration unit nearest the gym doors. The hum had changed, barely audible, but wrong. Caleb shut it down, rerouted foot traffic, and called Dr. Price. A clogged intake, damp and compromised, replaced within the hour. The near miss passed without ceremony. Another line drawn, unseen. Night fell early. Inside the gym, cots filled with the low orchestra of breathing. Emily moved among them with a flashlight and a clipboard, voice a steady murmur. Tom Alvarez ran oxygen checks, jaw set, learning the cost of small errors. Outside, Caleb logged times by headlamp, hands numb, breath frosting. Rex leaned into his leg, sharing heat. Near midnight, a young man staggered into the route and collapsed. Ethan Moore, 19, farm kid with hands too big for his wrists, had insisted he was fine. Rex had flagged him an hour earlier. Ethan had laughed it off. Now he shook, lips pale. They moved fast. The gym swallowed him. He stabilized. The system held. By 2, the town held its breath. No new sirens, no helicopters, just the wind and the hum of machines doing their jobs. Caleb sat on a folding chair outside the gym doors, notebook closed. He thought of tents and deserts, and the day he'd learned that survival was a series of small, unglamorous decisions made on time. Rex slept at last, chin on Caleb's boot, trust heavy as a blanket. When dawn came, it arrived clean and cold. The state team counted. Emily checked vitals. The number everyone waited for stayed at 0. Not cured, not over, but held. Redwood Hollow exhaled, careful not to breathe too deep. Morning arrived without announcement. No sirens, no rotor thrum, no hurried footsteps echoing off gym walls. Just a clean, pale light slipping over Redwood Hollow, catching on frost and turning it briefly to glass. Caleb Turner stood outside the gym with a paper cup of coffee, warming his hands, listening to the town relearn its own breathing. Rex lay stretched at his feet, asleep so deeply that only the slow rise and fall of his chest betrayed the work he'd done. Inside, the night's count held. Dr. Alan Price checked the board himself, numbers neat, restrained, professional. 0 new cases since dusk. Not eradication, not victory, but containment sustained long enough to matter. He nodded once, a scientist's nod that meant the system worked. "We'll keep the cordon," he said, "but you did the hard part." Emily Carter leaned against the doorway, shoulders sagging now that permission to rest existed. Her hair had come loose, a few strands stuck to her cheek. She smiled, small, genuine, at Caleb. "We can downshift," she said. Carefully, the town responded in quiet ways. Miller's reopened the back door for limited hours. Frank Miller stood behind the counter with a mask and a handwritten list, voice soft, jokes gone. The cafe brewed coffee for takeout only. The daycare gate stayed locked, but Lena Ortiz chalked hearts on the sidewalk, one for each family who'd complied without argument. Sarah Whitmore brought thermoses to the screening route, tall and composed, grief having trained her to do the next right thing without being asked. Lily walked beside her, masked, waving when Rex lifted his head. The dog thumped his tail once, then slept on. At mid-morning, the state team began to pack. Nora Kim supervised the last round of sampling near the mill, her notes precise, her tone lighter than it had been all week. The ventilation system was shut down, pending remediation. Barriers replaced tape. The building looked smaller now, a problem with edges instead of a shadow with teeth. Caleb returned to the cabin to shower and change. The mirror showed a man he barely recognized, stubble grown in, eyes ringed with fatigue but clear. He pulled on a clean shirt, then paused as Rex stirred, rose, and patted over. The dog's gait was slower, a hitch in the left rear leg that Caleb hadn't seen before. He knelt, checked the joint, gentle. "You did enough," he said. Rex pressed his forehead into Caleb's chest and stayed there. The clinic called at noon. A child wanted to see the dog. In the pediatric room, Jonah Reed sat propped on pillows, color back in his face, eyes bright with the embarrassment of survival. He gestured toward the bed beside him where Avery Cole, 8 years old, lay wrapped in a blanket. Avery was small for her age, sharp-eyed, with a shock of dark hair and a tendency to ask questions adults weren't ready for. She had spiked late, been flagged early, and responded quickly. "Is he a hero?" she asked, nodding at Rex. Rex approached, slow and polite, then sat. Avery reached out and touched his ear. "He's warm," she said, surprised. The room laughed, a soft, careful sound. Outside, Mark Holloway stood alone on the steps, jacket unzipped, optimism replaced by humility. He waited until Caleb finished inside, then offered a hand. "I should have listened sooner," he said. It wasn't a performance. It was the truth spoken quietly enough to count. Caleb shook his hand once. Nothing more was required. By afternoon, the gym began to empty, cots folded, heaters unplugged. Tom Alvarez hauled gear with an easy grin, the lines around his eyes deeper but steadier. He stopped to scratch Rex behind the ears. "Good boy," he said, voice thick. Rex accepted the praise without ceremony. The final patient transfer happened just before sunset, a woman stable enough to go home. Applause broke out, brief and embarrassed, then stopped. Redwood Hollow did not celebrate loudly. It learned. As light faded, Caleb and Rex walked Main Street. Windows glowed, curtains were open. People nodded instead of staring. The town looked like itself again, altered in ways that would show later. At the cafe door, Eleanor Finch stood with Milo tucked into her coat, the cat's torn ear peeking out. "Thank you," she said simply. Caleb nodded. Rex ignored the cat, professional to the end. They reached the edge of town where the road bent toward the cabin. Caleb paused, looking back once. He thought of places he'd left in silence, of tents struck before dawn, of names written down and never erased. This was different. This place had kept its breath long enough to live. At the cabin, he opened the windows a crack. Fresh air moved through, clean and ordinary. He set his notebook on the table and wrote one line: 0 new cases, community holding. Then he closed it. Rex ate, finally, slow and satisfied. Afterward, he lay in the last band of sunlight on the floor, eyes closing. Caleb sat beside him, back against the wall, and let the quiet arrive. Outside, Redwood Hollow settled into evening. The mill stood silent behind its barriers. The road was empty. The town did not cheer. It rested. In the end, this story was never really about a virus, a town, or even survival. It was about listening before it is too late. In our daily lives, danger rarely arrives screaming. Most of the time, it comes quietly. It looks like a small warning we ignore, a feeling we explain away, a voice we choose not to hear because it is inconvenient. Redwood Hollow survived not because it was strong, but because enough people finally slowed down, paid attention, and chose care over pride. Caleb did not save the town alone. Rex did not either. What saved them was humility, the courage to admit I might be wrong, the willingness to protect others even when it costs comfort, the decision to act early, gently, and together. In our own lives, we all have moments like that. A loved one who needs help before they ask. A habit we should change before it harms us. A quiet truth we feel in our hearts but hesitate to face. Listening to those small signals can be the difference between regret and redemption. If this story touched your heart even a little, I invite you to share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what part spoke to you most. Subscribe to this channel so we can continue walking these stories of courage, loyalty, and healing together. And before you go, let us take a moment. May God watch over you and your family. May He grant you wisdom to listen, strength to act, and peace in times of fear. May He protect those you love, even in the quiet moments you cannot see. If you believe that, type Amen in the comments.